I had a childhood interest and an interest that came back to me later in life when I moved to New Mexico. My childhood interest came from my Swiss grandmother. In 1910, my grandmother, a Swiss Catholic, decided that women were being neglected by the church, and she was extremely interested in various virgins, and being from Switzerland, very interested in a dark virgin because it's very prominent there, and especially in one particular setting. My grandmother set out from the Alps, went to Genoa, went to Gibraltar, went to Havana, and went to Veracruz and various provisions boats, the kind of boats that took fruits and groceries, wound up in Veracruz and went in a cart to Mexico City to see the Virgin Mary of Guadalupe in her Mexican invocation. She had been to the one in Spain, but somehow the Mexican one was attractive to her. It took her 6 months to make this epic voyage. When she came back to Switzerland, she brought back with her a very modest little green glass bottle with an image of Our Lady of Guadalupe in her Mexican invocation. That bottle is now in the collection at the University of New Mexico. Well, I'd grown up with the name Guadalupe. I knew there was a Guadalupe church in New York, and I lived in the New York area. I didn't really concentrate on it until I moved to New Mexico. In December of 1982, I was stopped by 2 state police officers south of Las Cruces, and I thought, oh good heavens, what have I done? I'm well under the speed limit, I have lights on, I'm a licensed driver, what do they want of me? And they made sirens, made me pull off, and I said, oh, what have I done, officer? They said, oh, nothing, lady, there's just a pilgrimage to Guadalupe crossing the road, and we've just got to stop everybody because we've got to let the devotees go up the mountain. And I thought, what is this all about? I said, Guadalupe's in Mexico. And they said, no longer, she's been here a long time. I came back to Santa Fe. Finally, I watched the pilgrims go to end that story. Came back to Santa Fe and thought, Guadalupe Street, Guadalupe Cathedral, Guadalupe's image here and there. At that point, I knew 1/100th of the images I've since found. And I decided, being a scholarly sort, that I would look up about Guadalupe. So I went to the state library, the local library, the library at the University of New Mexico, and I could only find a page here, 3 pages there, a paragraph, a photo image, nothing written about Guadalupe. So I decided to light my own candle with the Virgin on it and take a journey into the unknown and discover Guadalupe in New Mexico. And I've spent 9 years of my life doing just this, nothing else but discovering Guadalupe in New Mexico. And I'm even going to write a book about it. In fact, the book is quite well on its way. And here's what I found out. The dark virgin, as she's called, not the black, but the dark, and sometimes the brown virgin, came to New Mexico up the Rio Grande corridor in 1692. Why then? Rather easy to explain. To backtrack a little, in 1680 there was a Pueblo revolt in northern New Mexico where the Spanish and the Spanish who'd married into Mexican nationals, be they Mesoamerican or mestizos, had moved up into the northern Rio Grande Valley. They lived here in peace from 1598 to 1680. Then the Indians became very restive and upset and fretful under foreign rule, and there was a revolt. And all the non-Native American residents of the northern Rio Grande corridor fled to El Paso del Norte, not El Paso, Texas, but El Paso del Norte, now Ciudad Juarez. They lived there for 12 years. And what happened while they were there is they were exposed to the mission, Our Lady of Guadalupe, that had been built in 1659. So Guadalupe had already started to move more north. When the people from northern New Mexico spent a 12-year exile in Ciudad Juarez then called El Paso del Norte, they became exposed to this enormously growing and expanding devotion to Our Lady of Guadalupe in her Mexican invocation. In 1692, when General de Vargas brought those settlers back from the south banks of the Rio Grande up to Santa Fe in northern New Mexico again, they brought with them this new invocation, devotion. They were exposed to another Marian invocation or devotion or veneration that they had not necessarily known before. And when the Indians surrendered to de Vargas here in Santa Fe, they gave him an image of Jesus in silver and an image of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And from that time forward, she became firmly established in northern New Mexico. Now remember, there was no Las Cruces then. That wasn't founded until 1841. There was no Albuquerque. That was 1714. There was really just Santa Fe, the royal city, the city of Holy Faith, named for St. Francis of Assisi of Italy. So that Santa Fe was truly the main principal community in the state then. Naturally, he came back here. And from that time forward, it became a very massive, widespread devotion. What's very interesting is if you go to Mexico City, or the Vatican, or Library of Congress, or the University of New Mexico's private collection, there are 4 editions of Coronado's journals. He brings back Conquistadora, the beloved local wooden image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, of Conquistadora, Our Lady of Peace, she's called now. But he thanks Guadalupe for his safe return, because he knew that this was a direct connection to the Virgin Mary. After all, the Vatican has only recognized one apparition of the Blessed Mother in the New Hemisphere, and that's Our Lady of Guadalupe in Tepeyac outside of Mexico City. And so that's how she came here. Well, after that, the devotion and the love of her began to grow. There is a pueblo north of Santa Fe, Powaki, in 1706. It was dedicated to Our Lady of Guadalupe. It is still called the pueblo of Our Lady of Guadalupe at Powaki. And she became popular in names. One of my things I turned up in research was that I could not find a birth or death record mentioning the name Guadalupe for a man or a woman, and incidentally she's used for both, and I'll go into that later, prior to the 1692, 300 plus years ago. There was no mention of her name. After that, her name was constantly used. She was used on tombstones. She was used in dedications. The local artists, known as santeros, started then to portray her in bultos, freestanding statues, or retablos, flat paintings, or reredos, altar screens. And she became very popular in other little themes. She became popular in colcha stitching, which is a sort of running bedspread type of stitch. People embroidered her on blouses. She was painted here, painted on walls, painted everywhere. Guadalupe really became the major invocation of the Virgin Mary for the whole state. There are over 40 churches dedicated to her now in this state of New Mexico. If you take a walking tour around Santa Fe, I could show you at least 25 tiles in walls, including the Pera building right behind the oldest church, private homes everywhere. The back of the Lavanda Hotel, there is an image of Our Lady Guadalupe in tiles. And the most amazing thing I found out, the further I went into studies, and I was trained as an art historian, on the details of the painting, is they're all interpretations of the miraculous image that appeared on Juan Diego's cloak. Some have roses around. Those weren't on the original images. Some have leaves, some have flowers, some have clouds, some have vignettes of stories. Now, in the collection at the University of New Mexico, there is held a Currier and Ives engraving of Our Lady of Guadalupe, where she looks a bit like Queen Victoria. She gained at least 40 pounds, according to Currier and Ives. She wasn't the thin little maidenly virgin that she was in the original tilma, and therefore little images or vignettes or visual stories around the edge. And what are they all about? A man doing naughty and wrong and evil things to an innocent woman. They're not part of the original story. However, in the Santuario de Guadalupe here is the largest canvas to Our Lady of Guadalupe outside of Mexico City. It's done by a man named Alcibar. It was brought here in a mule cart in 3 sections and reattached. Now there we've got a wonderful interpretation of Our Lady of Guadalupe, but not a copy. Not the same number of rays, not the same number of stars on the cloak. What we have is a splendid, almost copy, but not quite the same thing, and the 4 stories of the 4 apparitions in each corner. And I urge anyone who comes to New Mexico to go and see this. Also in the Santuario are a number of other images of Our Lady of Guadalupe related to the story. Again, no two alike. One on black canvas is a copy of one done in Peña Blanca, just south of here. Now, the original image didn't appear in black, but this particular artist chose to put it that way. Now, underneath the Santuario's floorboards, for almost 100 years, were burial places. That is because of a fear, perhaps ungrounded, that Native Americans might want to plunder graves and take away the bones that had been sanctified for burial. And they'd put them under the church. When they excavated under the church a few years ago, they found a number of remains and very, very few religious items, but one medal of Guadalupe. But you have to remember, these people were devoted to Guadalupe, but at that time they were very poor and probably couldn't even afford a simple medal in lead. There's a lost chapel under the cathedral dedicated to Guadalupe. The oldest church was built right along the riverbanks, although that was never dedicated to Guadalupe. There is a wonderful old image of Guadalupe in it. And then when the cathedral was built over 100 years ago, Guadalupe was not included at first, but very shortly thereafter there was a wonderful old image of her and a stained glass window in the Lady Chapel, in the Conquistadora Chapel, a large stained glass window of her, and nobody knows who did it, when it was done. There's no record. It just is there. And the new altar screen has Guadalupe in the highest place. Now, sometimes there are miraculous stories that start to appear everywhere in all religious traditions. Miracles and religion go hand in hand. And there's a wonderful story about a woman in South New Mexico at Lake Arthur who one day was doing her cooking duties and thought she saw Jesus, an image of Jesus, etched on a tortilla. Of course, she saved it, and she still has it. And there's an article in one of the magazines about it. She saves Guadalupe on a tortilla, has it done up in some kind of plastic. But what does she do? She places Guadalupe in a tortilla, Jesus on a tortilla with Guadalupe above him. I have a Guadalupe on a tortilla, which I will dig out for you later. Very popular with names, as I say here. Now, another thing that I found out, and nobody had written anything about 2 of the pilgrimages, and only one very minor citation, newspaper citations, but no academic studies, of the 3 major pilgrimages to Our Lady of Guadalupe in the state of New Mexico. There is one, it is part of a 3-day celebration in Las Cruces, and as far as records, and that is at her feast day, December 12th. The whole 3-day fiesta starts on the 10th, the pilgrimage is on the 11th, the dances are on the 12th. Now, some newspaper reports cite the dances, but nobody went into the history. It was in 1849 at a smelter nearby that the Mexican laborers brought their devotion to Guadalupe from not far from there, which was El Paso del Norte. It didn't become Ciudad Juarez until the 1880s. That's the major pilgrimage in the state, December 11th. Annually since 1849. Now there is one over in Villanueva in San Miguel County, and that is always held on August 15th or the nearest weekend date. It's a very small community, and Guadalupe, an old bulto of Guadalupe, which is said to have come north in a bullock cart or a mule cart or some kind of a cart to Villanueva, is taken out of her nicho, put in on a little carrying stand, taken to a tractor, and taken to the top of the hill to a place called the Gruta. And Mass is celebrated there. It's a mariachi Mass. Everybody has guitars. Everybody's singing. There's a horse guard. And one year the horse guard, each different rider had different flags. And the flags were the American flag, the Mexican flag, and a flag from Franco, Spain. I guess they couldn't get a better Spanish flag. They go to the top of the hill. Old ladies with canes, children in little push carts, low riders, people with tattoos, people in wheelchairs, everybody on some kind of a very primitive device, no cars except for the priest. Go to the top of the Gruta, and it's right out of Chaucer. You are back 800 years into a very primitive Catholicism there, where people turn out to pay homage to their village image. The church there is called Our Lady of Guadalupe, and it's been there since the early 1800s. And then you've got a very new pilgrimage founded to let us say, invite young people to think about a permanent vocation in the Catholic Church. This pilgrimage takes place, it ends in Chimayo. It starts today it starts in Pewaukee, Trompas, Truchas, and Cordova. And groups of pilgrims band together carrying a church banner showing their affiliation, or a Pueblo banner, and meet on the eve of Mother's Day that morning outside of the little Santuario de Chimayo. Now the Santuario de Chimayo is not dedicated to Guadalupe, but there's one spectacular reredo there done by an old New Mexican santero, Jose Aragon, and the little chapel next to the church, where they have the miraculous mud. There's hundreds of images of Our Lady of Guadalupe, candles, paintings, retablos, simple things worth pennies, very, very valuable paintings. They're all to Our Lady of Guadalupe. Why? Because she's always been associated with miracles. The first miracle being her appearance on Juan Diego's tilma. Very shortly after that, it was December 12th, on December 26th of 1531, a second miracle occurred. An Indian, or a Mesoamerican native, as you wish to call him, was in a pilgrimage that was taking the tilma from the bishop's house to her first primitive santuario. The poor chap was shot through the neck with an arrow, and it was pulled out, and he asked in the name of Guadalupe that he be instantly cured, and he was. So Guadalupe has always been associated with miracles. She became the Mexican master symbol because of that reason. In the early 1700s, she was associated with the staying of floods, with the extinction of plagues. And in northern New Mexico, there are many, many personal testimonials to her miraculous, the grace that she can bring from Jesus to a miraculous cure. She's heavily associated in this state. Now, the other thing is she's associated with this life and the next. She's often used in tombstone imagery. Often at funerals you will see in remote villages her image carried, sometimes by hand, sometimes on a pole. And Guadalupe has always been invoked in this world and the next. Remember, she is the mother, and that came from her statement, first written down in about 1545, 1550. The first statements ever made, she said, "I am your mother. I am the ever Virgin. I am with you always, and I am with all people at all times." Therefore, she is with somebody at all times when she's invoked. She is never put in a judgmental position. She always disassociates the sinner from his sin. She accepts them as a forgiving mother. She asks in her name for miracles. She is also associated with good blessings, and she's also associated with the downtrodden, with the poor. And in that original document, it's called the Nikan Mopohua, written down by an Indian or Mesoamerican named Valeriano, as I say, between 1845 and 1850, she states that how she has come here, why she has come, and Juan Diego at first was not accepted by the bishop with his story of the miraculous appearance of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And he says to the Virgin in the second apparition, "Oh, don't ask me, ask somebody far more important. I am pitiably poor and dispossessed." And she has always been associated with the dispossessed. And one of the most famous Guadalupan scholars, a man named Elizondo, who is in San Antonio, Texas, and I quote him on this, I wish it had been my words, he said, "And she will listen to the silenced poor. She is the champion of the downtrodden. She's the champion of the dispossessed. She's the champion of the sick, the champion of people who don't have a big voice in the world." And that's where her strength comes from, that she is with the masses, and she is not, as she is, the Guadalupe in Spain is much more associated with royalty. She's in very regal garments and gowns. She is a lot darker in her image, but she's still associated, as Fra Angelico Chavez says in La Conquistadora, his little pamphlet, Guadalupe in the New World is part of the masses, where in the Old World she was part of royalty. And I think that's why she has gained such enormous popularity all over the Americas. She is the mother of the Americas. For that reason, she is a champion of the downtrodden, the dispossessed, the unheard from, the person without a voice. They can turn to her and be sure in their minds that she is with them. And this is nowhere more evident than in prisons. It's illegal to tattoo in the penitentiary, and yet you talk to the guards, you talk to the head of the penitentiary. He will say it happens all the time. 3/4 of all the Hispanic surname prisoners have a tattoo of Our Lady of Guadalupe, because she's not only in their hearts, in their prayers, in their minds, but she's under their skin, so to speak. And lots of people favor her because they feel no matter what they have done in this world, they are still someone on their team. And that is what Guadalupe is all about in New Mexico. Now, I could go on about lengthy histories in Europe. It is most interesting to me that the Spanish Guadalupe never went beyond Spain. And in Spain, not so far as one might think. The Mexican Guadalupe is all over North America, South America, Canada. She's in Alaska. She's in Nagasaki, Japan. She's in a temple in Madras in India. She's in the Philippines. She's in Stockholm. She's in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. She's in Paris. She's in Rome. She's in London. She's in Stockholm. Not the Spanish Guadalupe. The Mexican Guadalupe seems to have been taken up everywhere because, as she said, I am for all people. And we have to take her at her word, because she gives all people their power, and I think she's part of a renaissance of the feminine ideal in religion, and I can only see devotion to her growing because I see women taking a more active role in religion as an everyday need and as a theological necessity. And I see Guadalupe growing. All I can say is that the images of Guadalupe in the state are more prevalent. They're everywhere. 100 years ago, there were just a few santeros doing her. Now you go to Spanish Market, Guadalupe everywhere. Her name is everywhere. I can only see an expanding future for the Virgin, black virgins, dark virgins in general, all virgins, the Virgin Mary and the Virgin of Mary in her Mexican invocation. I see nothing but a splendid future for her because she is everywhere, all times. You go into a native home here, be it Native American or Mexican American, on an altar, there's always a Guadalupe candle, always a Guadalupe image. Houses, everywhere where she is revered, you will find her image and likeness, even if it's a humble interpretation, very evident. I also feel that the price, whether it's a retablo as we have here, that's probably today worth a great deal more, it's just painted on tin, or something done on a very simple, inexpensive handkerchief. It doesn't matter the price of the object. You are not demoting the Virgin Mary of Guadalupe by having her in something inexpensive. You are keeping her near you at a price you can afford, or anyone can afford, where there's so many images that for so long were exclusively offered to the possession of the rich or in a church. Now you can keep the Virgin Mary of Guadalupe with you at all times because she's easily affordable. She has also been used until we had required auto insurance in the state of New Mexico, I think, as an insurance policy. The number of autos with Guadalupe decal, Guadalupe on a string, it's some kind of an image of her above or on the dashboard or above the light above the car. You see Guadalupe's. Guadalupe's always been associated with safety in an automobile. I will tell you a personal, and it is not meant to be humorous or frivolous, story about Guadalupe. I have a puppy named St. Bruno. And St. Bruno is a very, very boisterous, rowdy little pup. And one day when I was cleaning the kitchen cabinets, I said to myself, Guadalupe candles, dog food. It's a strange arrangement I've got in here. I put the can of dog food on the side, on the floor while I was cleaning the cabinet, and that naughty little scamp goes with his teeth and opens the can, and not only eats the dog food in the can, but starts to eat the can. I lit that candle of Guadalupe. I called the vet, and the vet told me what to do. And he said, you've been through a lot of things with this puppy. I don't know, his luck may be running out. I said, not with Guadalupe. I gave him several pounds of white bread dipped in grease. And a few days later, I found all the little pieces of the tin can. And St. Bruno has been alive and well for 2 more years. And all I can say is Guadalupe did her work, because the vet said, his luck has run out. And I knew it hadn't. That's my personal Guadalupe story. And I can tell you, there are lots of people in the state, many of them hesitant to talk about it. But Guadalupe is felt to have very personal, intimate contact with the people who love her. It is she who is on the altar. It's she who is under the skin. It's she who protects the house. It's she who protects the automobile. No one single other sacred image is used in such a widespread manner and with such confidence that there'll be a positive response. Nowadays, as I say, with this expansion of Guadalupe in trivia, which is not trivializing her, it's just putting her image and likeness in the hands of people who can afford it. You find her on car keys, kitchen magnets, Guadalupe lollipops, decals, emblems, scarves. She's very popular on T-shirts. There's hardly a parish in town or in the whole Archdiocese of Santa Fe that doesn't have a Guadalupe image somewhere that groups of people wear on a T-shirt. She's readily available. Why? I think the answer is because people want her, and you want something you need. You feel you need the Virgin's protection, therefore she's there for you. She never sleeps. She's 24 hours. She's everywhere, all time, all places, in all spaces. And I feel that that's her great hallmark, is her widespread availability, and she will always listen to you. Whether you're poor in wallet or poor in spirit or poor in courage, when she listens to the silenced poor, as Elizondo said, I think we can take that word poor and see it in many dimensions. I think that's what Guadalupe means to me. And I can tell you, I wouldn't go out of the house. I went to Rome 2 years ago. I wouldn't leave the house without Guadalupe earrings, Guadalupe on a badge, a Guadalupe prayer card. She's with me, I'm behind her. And that's the way it goes. And she's very popular in little jewelry type images. This happens to be one for less than $3. This was considerably more expensive. It's set in silver. But you will find her in, and often in medals. A few years ago there was a medal struck with the Pope on one side and Guadalupe on the other. You can find it in coin shops in Albuquerque. I don't think you can go into the furthest, deepest valley in this state and to the most commercial establishment in this state without finding Guadalupe. You find her on restaurant walls, you find her in hotels, you find her at truck stops, you find her on calendars, you find her on mustard plasters, on bodily plasters to heal your minor complaints. And that's my feeling about Guadalupe in New Mexico. One of the reasons why I think we've seen a resurgence in devotion to Guadalupe, and I can only relate this to the pilgrimage on December 11th in Las Cruces, is because the Pope has come to the New World for the first time in 1979, I believe it was, in the spring of 79, and he called Guadalupe the Mother of the Americas. And he has made great invitations for people to increase their devotion to the Blessed Mother through the invocation of Our Lady of Guadalupe from Mexico. I think another reason is, I think the more the world is beset with impersonality and violence, the more people seek out the simple answers of faith. The more they need to have faith in their traditions restored. I also think Guadalupe is part of this resurgent feminine principle. I think you're finding women, after all, everywhere. After all, the Pope didn't at that time make as much of a invitation to devotion around the four apparitions with Juan Diego as he did about the Virgin. Now, Juan Diego has since been beatified, and he probably will be canonized soon. But I think all over the world, worldwide, and especially in the New World, there has been a return. People are looking to the denied or the suppressed or the repressed side of the feminine activity in the religious arena, in the whole psyche of human beings. You simply can't deny one side without having the other side be in serious trouble. And I think that there are these reasons: the papal visit, the return to the feminine ideals, the resurgence, as I say, of the feminine equation, and I think as an antidote to the insanity, the terrorism, the impersonality of modern life, people need to have a personal response to a religious icon, image, symbol, tradition, whatever it is, however you want to make it meaningful for you. I think this is very important. I would say those are the reasons. And I think in reference to Las Cruces, you've got more public knowledge about the event, but I think people, especially there, they are turning to some kind of a higher order and authority, and they see it in this humble little dark maiden virgin. Instead of turning to one more dictator, or one more macho figure, or one more leader, or one more CEO who promises a cure for the world with the new drug or the new car, I think they're realizing that the world doesn't run that way, and the only way to make the world meaningful is to have a balance and to go back to the basics of women in religion. That's my feeling. As this simple little $3 pin shows, it's made like a door. We are opening up the door to women in religion, and in this case, Guadalupe and her Mexican invocation in specific. We are now going back to the original basic history and meaning of Christianity, to love one another and to respect the feminine side. After all, Jesus was not a particularly militant chap. He asked people to stand up for their convictions, but Mary was very important in the history of Jesus. I think we're opening up the door and letting her in again. And not just on altars, and not just in pious repetitions, but in action. Liberation theology, as you know, was found by Gutierrez in Peru, and then it moved on to more to Brazil. It was more the Spanish Guadalupe there. I would say that in liberation theology, you have a meshing of what Elizondo said. She'll listen to the silence poor. She is going to liberate the people in the church from some of the antiquated concepts in the church, or those concepts that grew up, became rigid and calcified, and became like stainless steel doors with little glass windows that kept the people from really asking what the church can do for them, what they can do for the church, and the church's action in everyday life. I think that's where she enters into the liberation theology movement. She is moving in homes and in hearts and in shelters and in places where people need the freedom of a whole new way of approaching, what would you say, assets. What are assets? Are they just money, or are they spiritual assets? I think she is, again, we have to go back to the metaphor of the door. We're going to the door and letting her into daily life, not only symbolically, not only in a little pin, but in action. And that's why I was very interested when I went over to Gallup, New Mexico. There's a very modest little storefront institution which, under the name of Guadalupe, helps Mexican migrant workers get secondhand clothes, find places to live. She's being used at an active street level, because she was so adaptable. And because she moved in so many circles, and because she was a very porous symbol in the sense she absorbed all needs from all levels, and because she appeared as a simple maiden in a Mexican costume. After all, she was dressed with a little mantle over her head and a pink dress. She did not come striding in with regal gowns and a scepter and an orb and things like that. People have identified with, they can turn to her, because I personally can't identify with a woman in a mink coat to the floor who has a terribly fancy car when I don't even own a car. I mean, I identify with people who think and who dress and look like me. And I think that that's what people see in her. Someone, she's like Mamacita. She is Mamacita. Let me give you a few of the antecedents or history of Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico. I will go back to start in Spain and do it very briefly. What does the name Guadalupe mean? In Moorish Arabic, it means hidden river or hidden river in a ravine. Guadal comes from the Arabic Guadi, wadi, ravine, water. You can look it up in any Arabic dictionary. Lupe meant hidden. Has nothing to do with the word lobo, which is a Latin word that had long since entered the Spanish language. Hidden river. Why? Because the original Spanish monastery built in the 1320s in Extremadura in Spain was built next to a river in a ravine, a hidden river. Now the image there is said to have had a miraculous history. It may even have been done by the Apostle Luke. It is very black, very dark. The image is on a high altar. She's always dressed in very regal gowns. She holds the infant Jesus, which makes her very different than the New World Guadalupe. She does not have a body halo. She has a crown in her stars, which may or may not be related to Revelations 12:1 with the woman of the Apocalypse, where she appears with 12 stars in her crown. Certain biblical theologians say yes, certain no. But in any case, that's her iconography. Now, when Spain started its conquest of the New World, there were two very famous conquistadores, Pizarro, who went to Peru, and Cortez, who went to Mexico. Cortez came from Extremadura, and maybe the last church he ever went into was Guadalupe in Spain. So when the Spaniards came to the New World, they brought a very active name in their mind. The Virgin of Guadalupe. They didn't think so much of the Virgin in Palestine. They thought of their Virgin. When the apparitions occurred, after all, Cortez came in 1519, and 12 years later, the four apparitions of the Virgin Mary occurred to, or came to, Juan Diego, who was incidentally 57 years old, often called a young boy, but all records say he was 57. He was a widower, and he lived in the neighborhood with his uncle, who was the recipient of the fifth apparition, where he had an instant cure on his bed. And that also helps link Guadalupe to the miracle tradition. Now, I think what happened, there are many stories, there are many interpretations, some by what they call the anti-apparitionist group, who say this whole thing is a joke. But certainly what happened was the Spaniards transferred the name but not the image to the New World. It was what you call a commingling of Mariology or Marian devotion. We had an old name, just as we have here. We have Albuquerque. That's a place in Spain, right? And look at the number of Anglo-Saxon names along the East Coast that are named for an old place. So the old name came, but they're new towns, and these were new apparitions. And I think that's what happened, is that the image was totally new. Now, what do we see in the New World image? We see the Virgin standing with, and she's an Inmaculada in Spanish with an N, in English with a double M, an Inmaculada, not holding the infant Jesus. I think this symbolically is very important. She is the mother to everybody. She is not just functioning in her role as the mother of Jesus, which she is. We all know, we accept that. But this is a more expanded function to me. And then we know from chemical analysis done by somebody asked by the church, a man named Dr. Callahan, that there were additions to the image. But what is original is the Virgin, her face, her hands, her dress, and her mantle. The gold and the black were added later by human hands. The gold stars, the gold arabesques on her dress, the gold crown, which appeared around 1561, and incidentally disappeared 100 years ago. There's no crown on the Virgin now. If you go down to Mexico City, that's gone. These were human additions. Some people say good, some say bad. But we still have the core image, and nobody can explain how it was done. Nobody. They have put it under infrared technology, and nobody can find out how it was done. There are no brush strokes. There's no underdrawing. It is still to be accepted as a miraculous apparition on the tilma. And as you know, in the fourth story, with all the doubts the church had about Juan Diego really seeing the Virgin Mary, on the during the fourth apparition, that Mary appeared to Juan Diego, telling him that his uncle was already healed up, and those were her words, and she would help him wrap the roses. Actually, they were called Castilian flowers. We've assumed they were roses because of the Castilian rose. I will help you wrap Castilian flowers in your mantle. And she did that. He went and took them to the then Archbishop Montufar, opened his tilma, or his cactus fiber cloak, and they all fell to the floor, and miraculously appeared her portrait inside the tilma. Now that's what we see everywhere in tattoo, in the images we have here. They are all other, except for the original image on the tilma. Everything else is an interpretation. That's why you see so many fanciful inserts. Why sometimes you will see her with a green cloak. I have seen her down in Las Cruces where the cloak is red and the dress is blue, which should be the reverse. They're all interpretation. Each artist, as each person takes Guadalupe, opens the doors of his heart, so to speak, and portrays her the way he wishes, the way he feels, the way he knows. And the further they are away from what you might call academic art, the more vivid, the more wild, by that I mean unusual in interpretation, usually the images, because they don't have anything to copy. They have to use their memory. The artist has to use his memory. And he will give her 20 rays where she had many more than that. He will remove the stars. He'll put the stars in. He will do her, as I said, in Sanctuary. She's painted on black, but she's richly painted on white. You'll see orange flowers. You'll see blue flowers. There were no flowers in the original image. They're just associated with the original story. And so you get so many artistic interpretations that commingle story with history, with image, with artistic talent. Dominique Mazot is the specialist in the Polish version, she went over there. I did the curatorial work for our Virgin, and they, had my work in Polish and English over there. And a great many of these images went to Poland. My images were on display there in Jasna Góra. I think it is because she is with the dark side of life and the black side of life, the life that isn't pretty and all polished up and in the broad sunlight. It's the hidden, the underground. I think there's a very strong connection between the Polish Dark Virgin and all Dark Virgins in general, that they represent the veiled, the hidden, the underground, the secret side of life, the life that has been so suppressed for so long in favor of something prettified, beautified, and glorified, that we have forgotten that the original, some of the original teachings of Christianity to help the poor, right? The poor you shall always have with you. Well, if you have something always with you, then you better start caring for them. And I think that's where she links into the Polish Dark Virgin. I think that Dark Virgins everywhere, that darkness represents something that doesn't have light on it. Right? Isn't that what you would say? How would you?
Definitely.
Yeah. I think darkness is the absence of light. And I think that's exactly what we're finding, especially in the Mexican Guadalupe, with these splendid rays of light around her. And the fact that she appeared with the song of birds, with light coming around her. I think that she has come to dispel darkness. That's exactly her mission in the New World, to dispel these concepts that we've held too long in our minds, and that we've been victim of our own thinking, that we always have the poor and everything has to be dark, and these are the people we can forget because they're not in the light. I think darkness as a place where things can germinate, where things take time before they can burst forth into light. After all, the Buddhists use that with their lotus image, the little lotus that's under the dark water and then bursts forth on the surface in the light of day. I think we can take darkness as a place where things have a chance to germinate, to take time before they can go out into the light, such as a baby in a womb cannot go out until it is fully formed. A plant ought not to break forth from the mud until it can stand the wind and the rain and the outward elements. I think that that's a very important concept. But I also see that the darkness, that's the darkness of nature, which is very beautiful, very protective, very caring, very nurturing, and very much in tune with the right time before it bursts forth. But then there's the man-made darkness, which suppresses things, which keeps things from coming to light. I mean, look at political scandals. There's so much man-made covering up. There's one thing to being born and embedded in the darkness. There's another thing to squashing someone down into it. I mean, darkness, I think, has many aspects. And I think that the Virgin Mary of Guadalupe in her Mexican invocation represents the healthy side of darkness with its light ahead. Or she is there to warn us of the dark side of darkness, which is suppression and snuffing out and covering up and putting into a black hole that which needs to be exposed. I think she has a dual function. As I see the differences between the Spanish Guadalupe in Extremadura and the Mexican Guadalupe who appeared at Tepeyac, first there's a fundamental difference. Theologically, the one in Spain is a lovely handmade image whose history is lost in the sands of time. The one in Mexico City is part of a miracle apparition, where the one in Spain is not connected to a miraculous apparition, but there have been miracles accomplished in turning to her in prayer. They are quite different in their genesis. One is human-made and one is inexplicable manufacture. I think the one in Spain, was very localized. It didn't go beyond Spain. She did not really travel to other parts of Europe. After all, in Rome, there are many images of Our Lady of Guadalupe from Mexico, and I could find none of the Spanish. There are 2 churches in Rome. There's a statue in the Vatican garden, and now we've got the new chapel under the main altar of the Vatican, all to the Mexican invocation, none to the Spanish. She was localized, like Conquistador in Santa Fe, New Mexico. That doesn't make her less important, less holy, less wonderful, but it didn't make her as universal. She is not as universal in those invocations. Now, the Spanish Guadalupe is very regal, always dressed in expensive brocades and embroidered cloths. She has a scepter in one hand, Jesus in another. She has a very, very ornate crown. Now, the Mexican Guadalupe is dressed as a Mexican peasant would be, with a mantle and a very simple dress underneath, just a peasant's dress. Probably also like Mary in Palestine, because the Mexicans didn't use a blue cloak and a pink dress. So she is an apparition of through divine history into a local format. And that's the way I see her. She does not have Jesus on her arm, which then reminds me of her more expanded role as mother to everybody, although this is implicit in her motherhood of Jesus. It isn't confined to that in the Mexican image. The Mexican image, as I say, appeared on humble cactus fiber cloth, the ayate fiber, and the Mexican image also, You do not have the sense of people dressing the image seasonally, going up and changing her clothes. She is in, or the image on the tilma is in a glass vault in the present basilica, which is the fifth structure to house it since December 26, 1531. And I relate to her more than I do personally to the regal image in Spain. Now there are two schools of academic thought which would take a month for each school to go into on how to interpret the symbols of the image. And you can get into a great deal of controversy. Are these symbols from the Mesoamerican culture or from the European culture? We know that the symbols are the half moon, the angel, the stars on the mantle, the full body halo called a resplendor in Spanish, and the crown. Those are the important symbols, and the tassel at the waist. Now there are ways of interpreting. It would take hours to go into these different interpretations. We'll start with the most significant symbols. The half moon. There's a school of interpretation that says that this half moon symbol came directly from Spain and Europe and had nothing to do with Mesoamerica, and it symbolizes the Christian message trampling the Muslim world, which is often represented by the crescent moon. But the Muslims didn't use that crescent moon until the Battle of Constantinople or Byzantium in, when was it, 1460, 70, something like that. So it doesn't have a long history in the Islamic world. And you can look that up in the Concise Dictionary of Islam. So that to say that it means the triumph of Christianity over Islamic thought, I would have a problem with that. I would say that the moon lunar periodicity has always been much more closely associated with the feminine, the lunar periodicity of cycles, the 28-day periods of the moon, the 28-day period of a woman's cycle. The moon in almost all traditions, not the Egyptian, not every tradition, has been always either in the feminine gender or associated with women. I think it has to do with the suppression of the female energy or psyche in certain religious periods and traditions. I see the trampling upon the moon as a suppression of the feminine energy myself. I don't think it's related at all to this concept of trampling the infidel of the Islamic world, because it wasn't used before the Battle of Constantinople. It's at the bottom of all things. That was what the next point I was going to make, that the half moon, which is normally associated with the heavens, is now in a totally reversed order when it comes to Marian iconography, because you've got the moon taken out of nowhere, the endless space of time, and put under the Virgin's feet as a support system. It's right there, resting on the earth, as a sort of vital link. It's the linking element, and I say you've got a total reversal of order here. You've got the moon taken out of the heavens, where it really doesn't function as in the same way as it does when it is taken into the basic earth, because then by extension, let us reverse the reversal. We can say then the feminine works everywhere in heaven and earth. Right? Okay, let us then move on. What was the second one you want? The roses. The roses are, well, blooming in general has always been associated with femininity. The blossoming of the body, the blossoming of the child in the womb. And the rose is very much associated with, especially the cabbage rose, which is not the rose of Guadalupe, that was the Castilian rose, but the idea that some tight little bud can burst forth into glorious flower and have overwhelming scent, and it has always that warning of a little thorns. You know that wonderful French saying, "Il n'y a pas de rose sans épine," meaning there's no rose without a thorn. When you deal with the feminine, you better deal with it justly and in the right place, because you will have an incision. You must deal with women correctly, and that is in the right place, which is every place in heaven and under the feet. And I think the rose it became particularly popular in the Middle Ages. The Roman de la Rose, that was very, very popular. And I think it was an inevitable association. Now, the rose itself, in the Mexican story of Our Lady of Guadalupe, is associated only in the telling of the tale. It is not on the tilma itself. It comes as a sort of coactive principle with the miracle of the apparition. And that's one thing that would make sense, because a rose is a very temporal thing, where the Virgin is very permanent. The rose comes and it goes. The scent comes and it goes. And it appeared, and therefore it was not part of the permanent apparition. It became associated with the stories. It comes every time to life in the retelling. And the crown. Well, this was one of my specialties. There are two things that most people confuse and ought to be made clear, and that is the coronation of the Virgin and the Virgin wearing a crown. The coronation of the Virgin assures Mary of her place in heaven with Jesus on the right side of God the Father Almighty. And when Mary receives a coronation, whether in image or in tradition, it usually comes from a Vatican endorsement. Now, the Virgin wearing a crown comes from a very old tradition, I believe under John the VII in the 3rd century in Rome. The oldest known image we have of the Virgin Mary wearing a crown is Santa Maria in Trastevere in Rome, one of the oldest churches of Christendom. Incidentally, I have a wonderful photo of a bulletin about Our Lady of Guadalupe in her Mexican invocation tacked onto that door. The 3rd century door with the 16th century apparition. Quite amazing. And I think when the Virgin wears a crown, that's an artistic convention, is to show that Mary has been crowned with glory. And what does a crown mean? A crown stands for a potentate, a person with power. She has enormous power, not because of the crown, but the crown because of the power. We got to get this sequence straight here. She is crowned because she's powerful. She doesn't get the crown isn't some little magic device like a magician would have in his hip pocket that makes a rabbit appear in a hat. That's not it. She has the power. Therefore, she deserves the crown. She merits the crown. It is the power that gives her the crown. The crown doesn't have any magical properties. It's decorative. She is the one who infuses it. It's the woman who has enormous power. And remember, the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. That's quite a bit of power. And I think this is most extraordinary. But it is, to my knowledge, the oldest image of Our Lady of the Blessed Mother. And I can look that up in a book I have here about Rome. It is in Santa Maria di Trastevere in Rome. And, of course, the earliest image we have of Mary is right outside of Rome in the Ostian catacombs. There we've got Mary with short hair, not unlike mine, bobbed, and she has a blue dress. A white dress with a blue mantle. She is uncrowned, and she's very simple. That's the oldest image we have. Look at the Derek Booth's famous painting in the Frick of the Virgin. She looks like she's as white as a piece of plumbing. Why? Because he used local models. He's got all the local landscape. Why wouldn't he use the local complexion? You very seldom see, the more Mary gets, the further she gets away from Palestine into the hands of men painters, the paler she gets. But originally she was a dark virgin. I have a Mediterranean background, and my skin is considerably darker than most people's. And you look at Mary's profile and the image on the tilma. It isn't at all a Mesoamerican nose. She's got a real Middle Eastern, Mediterranean knows. I think she is part of the miracle tradition of Europe, of a virgin starting with the Middle East and moving into Europe with Christianity. And I think to read her from the Mesoamerican symbol, that was a school. As I say, I could spend months going into this. I've studied it in great depth. In the 18th century and in 1951, there was a revival of that, to see nothing but Mesoamerican symbolism in her. I think there is, especially in the editions. And since she's all things to all people in all time, this would include Mesoamerica, but you can't exclude her European tradition or her Middle Eastern tradition. Mary was from the Middle East, the Holy Land. I mean, you can't, unless you want to just say the whole thing is bunkum and throw it out, you can't get rid of that. And I think that, as I say, the darkness can be looked at in two ways: as this beautiful, nurturing, womb-like, earth, nourishing space that gives pause and time for something to manifest in all its bloom as a rose. Or you can look at it as it can be the dangerous side of things too. You have to look at the dark virgin and say, she's also warning people. She's also saying, you've got to get with my darkness and don't hide it. Or you too will perish into dark. You will go into a different type, a man-made darkness, which is far worse. Nature makes a good darkness. Man makes a bad one. I guess is what I'm trying to say. If we do not listen to what she stands for, which is peace, love, forgiveness, sharing among all people, everybody equal, that the poorest, most humble person, such as Juan Diego, a Mesoamerican, dispossessed, widowed, and pitiably poor, he was the bearer of a great message. We cannot snuff out the voice of the silenced poor, because that's where the message comes from. It doesn't really come from the White House or the executive boardroom. It certainly hasn't come from the last two White Houses. Maybe we'll have more enlightenment now. But we certainly couldn't have had less of more of a white macho, I don't even know that there are poor people. There is no darkness. There is no poverty. There are no dispossessed in the Bush White House. I mean, he was totally oblivious to the fact there are some people who are actually hungry, George. He couldn't see because he had his own darkness in front of him. He was absolutely incapable of seeing. You could have put him in the middle of a slum and he'd say, oh dear, I need my driver. I'm in the wrong place. I have a theory about ex-presidents. You can tell the good ones from the bad ones. Those who really were interested in doing something for the people of this country, and by example the world, go out and do things like Mr. Carter and rebuild houses. The rest go to country clubs. When the Holy Family fled to Egypt, nothing happened to them there. Well, if you've ever been to Egypt, everybody's very dark in Egypt. I mean, you might as well be in a totally black community in America. It isn't as dark as the blackest parts of Africa. But she had no problems. Why? Because they took her right in. She was one of them. They identified with her darkness. Had she been the little white virgin from Belgium, I don't think she might have wound up roasted. She might not have made it. I think that she was very dark. And after all, the Middle Easterner of that time was a pre-Crusader Middle Easterner. Now, there's certain pockets. You go to Syria. I spent a summer in Damascus. You go to certain parts of Syria, and you will see whole colonies, whole tribal groups of people with rather blue eyes, or hazily eyes, certainly not dark eyes, and quite fair, because they were the illegitimate offspring of the northern Europeans who came as crusaders. Remember, Mary lived in pre-crusade Israel, where they didn't have the white elements. Very important, I think, to remember that. She was dark. We know that the first man that we know as skeletals from the old Duvai Gorge there in Africa. In Africa, I guess it's near Addis Ababa now. It's in Ethiopia. 2 million years ago. And we have no evidence of life in Europe at that time, and we know that these people were all black. It just took time for skin to pale out. You go to the Arctic regions, and people are very pale. Very pale. And you go to India, where I've lived a good deal of my life. North Indians tend to be much paler than South Indians. Function of the sun, also in function of invasion. It wasn't until the Aryan invaders came into North India, and after all, their caste system is, they don't use the word caste, they use the word varna, color. The caste system is based on the dark at the bottom. Well, of course, Gypsy Romany is a language that came from India, left India about 1000 AD and moved across Central Europe and sort of found a reservoir or a pool of receptivity, I guess you might say it, in Hungary. But the northern, I think there's no question that certain traditions, after all my specialty is Sanskrit, that's where I got my PhD in, you get an enormous influence from Asian India into Europe. Just language alone. Look at the word Jupiter. Supater in Sanskrit. Brater, brother. Duter, daughter. Brater, brother. Lok, look. Yuj, yoke, yoga. I think you have an enormous transmission of religious tradition from the subcontinent into Europe. And the idea of the dark goddess certainly had to be part of the caravan. I mean the caravan in a large metaphoric sense. I'm not talking about one pack trip. I think there's no question that Kali migrated probably in sporadic migrations and probably in smaller doses. But I think that there were lots of influences on Europe, and not all of them came out of Israel. And not all of them came when Constantine made the official religion of the Roman Empire Christianity in 326 AD. There was still a lot of migration into Europe. Look at how all of northern Judaism, all the Ashkenazim came through another route rather than through Rome. Not everything that went to Europe came through the Christian medium. And not every facet or nourishment or aspect of a goddess is necessarily Christian-based. I mean, I think that is to deny our roots in other traditions. But Kali, I mean, there is a very important person in the Hindu pantheon. You go to Calcutta and see how important Kali is. I mean, she is a very, very important aspect of Hindu pantheism. And that the Dark Mother, she was not a virgin, but she was the Dark Mother. Look at the famous book all over Europe, Aesop's Fables. Aesop was a Greek. Where do you think he got the stories? They're Himalayan stories. They're called the Panchatantra. They're animal wisdom tales. There's so much that came from West Asia, from East Asia to more remote transmission of traditions. But from West Asia, from India, oh my heavens, yes. Tremendous influence on all the active elements of culture, be they language, music, religion, costume, dance. I think you've got, as I say, from West Asia, west of the Brahmaputra, west of Calcutta. When you're getting into East Asia, that's another world. But the routes, the caravan routes, the trade routes all went that way. And the Aryan invasion, you know what routes they took. And if you study the original Indo-Europeans, they all came out of an area, probably south-central Russia, and they spun off like a pinwheel. Well, in that spinning, they certainly accumulated things from different areas, and there have always been traders. If you just look at the history of plants, and I'm writing a lot of stuff for vegetarian magazines, because I'm a very active vegetarian. Look at rice. Started in Asia, became very, very popular in Europe. Noodles. We think of pasta from Italy. The Italians got it from Asia. There's so many things that came from that part of the world. Well, the rose associated with Guadalupe. The Castilian rose came from Persia. And I bring that out in my book. I spent 2 weeks studying rose culture. The Castilian rose came from Persia. And so that you get a tremendous influence of Orientalia, even the name alone, Guadalupe, from, what would you say, absorbed into the European tradition of the Dark Virgin, especially Guadalupe being my specialty. But you get this enormous reservoir, if you want to call it, or packload of different elements that go into the iconography and the tradition of the Spanish than the Mexican Virgin, that even have a more anterior... Well, look at the Matachinas dance. Nothing more clearly displays the history of the Middle East on Western conduct. Matachinas, what does it mean? It comes from the old Persian word, which eventually came from Sanskrit, mr, or mri, to kill, to oppose in battle, to do battle with, but not necessarily in a military confrontation, to battle evil with good. Mri became matachin, matachinis. It's the confrontation of good with evil, and that's what the dance always shows. Those little sparkling wands, they are a kind of shriveled version of a sword. The mask, hiding from evil. The whole concept of the matachin. Read Flavia Walter Ciampe's book, University of Nebraska Press, on the Matachinas dance. She makes the link. Anybody who studied it makes the link. And there's a link to a dance in England, the Morris dance, which is good versus evil. Comes right out of Matachinas, which comes right out of Persia. And look at the word deity and devil, from the same thing, deva, deity. If it's feminine, deva, if it's masculine. So I think to deny the Eastern traditions, by the it's Middle East traditions, the Middle Eastern tradition, to deny that they had an influence on the development of the Christian Virgin is to be totally oblivious of history and simply not wake up to the facts. And I think that the Virgin of Guadalupe, in both her Spanish and her Mexican invocation, display an influence of Middle Eastern and West Asian iconography and theological tradition. Personally, I don't see how you could deny it, that there wasn't a transference from the older pre-Christian to the later. Now, to be sure, Islam was post-Christian, but there were people who were active in religious activities in that part of the world for centuries. Before Islam developed, there were people there, and Islam then absorbed the local stuff. It's this layering, layer by layer by layer, that builds up what we see now. We see it now and we think it just happened. No, everything has roots in the dark soil. And that's how I see Our Lady of Guadalupe, with tremendous roots. Now, I wouldn't say this to every priest, because he would freak. But that isn't the way I see it, and I bring out in my book the history of the Matachinas dance in Persia and the whole idea of a certain amount of darkness. Maybe she's not called the Black Virgin, but she's the Dark Virgin. My personal view is that Kali, the great dark goddess of the subcontinent, some of her influence and the traditions clustered around her, her iconography, had to have been transmitted to Europe across trade routes, which were the great transmission routes of the time. There was no radio or television. Shipping wasn't possible for Inner Asia. You didn't have waterways. The way cultures commingled was through trade routes. And what goes on an animal's back or on a pack that the animal carries or pulled behind the poor beast is not only, let us say, silk and saffron, but it's also the camel driver brings his thoughts, his words, his traditions. And I am certain that beyond a shadow of a doubt that there was a commingling, a transference of certain concepts that came from the subcontinent and its greater area into Europe. We only have to look at foodstuffs and many such simple things as foodstuffs, plants such as the rose, words. We have direct proof of their transmission. We certainly then can't eliminate certain elements of the transfer of worship, highly involved with the transfer of the black goddess, the black virgin, the dark deity, female, whatever you want to call it. You can fight over the name, but you cannot fight over the fact that there was definitely a transmission of the clusters surrounding a certain image historically that were moved into the European area, and they came, I think, from Asia. And then they too were commingled with the pre-Christian activities on the continent of Europe. I think that all these traditions go back to the same root, which is that the goddess has always been worshipped, almost always in a dark form, and that she's always had tremendous power until she encountered hierarchical religions, which was really basically those of the biblical tradition. And I think you've always had this energy in the dark woman. You can try, and you can dump a lot of chemicals on it, and you can run over it with trucks, but you can't get rid of it. It will always come back. It's like the eternal return. It will always come back. You can't get rid of that energy. As long as there is a living woman, there will be that part of her psyche.